No matter where you live, whether it's a town or in the country, chances are you don't live too far from a churchyard or a cemetery. Have you ever just wandered around and read some of the headstones and wondered what kind of life these people had, or wondered how they died? If you look closely, you may find one that has a curious epitaph written upon it, or a couple of words that may seem curious and hint to something intriguing. In this series, I'll be bringing you stories behind these headstones to reveal an interesting life or a tragic and sorrowful end. These are not celebrities as we know today. Some may have been recognised in their lifetime but are forgotten names now, or they may be normal folk whose lives were tragically cut short. Join me as I discover some tales from the grave. Lying here in the graveyard of St Chad's Church in Shrewsbury is an unusual headstone. Laid flat on the ground, it is inscribed with just two words: Ebenezer Scrooge. Who was this Ebenezer Scrooge? Unfortunately, there aren't many written records about him. The only record we have of him is from a short story by a fairly unknown writer named Charles Dickens. It's said that Dickens was bored one Christmas and decided to write a ghost story about Mr. Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge was born about 1783 in London. We know very little about Scrooge's childhood apart from his father was strict and he sent Scrooge to boarding school at a young age. Scrooge and his father didn't have a very loving relationship, and at Christmas his father refused to have young Ebenezer home, making him stay at school instead. One of Scrooge's few happy memories was when his sister Fan came to take him home one Christmas, saying that their hard-hearted father had changed. In his 20s, Scrooge apprenticed at the warehouse of a jovial and generous master, Mr. Fezziwig. He was also engaged to a young woman named Belle, who came from a poorer family. Scrooge at this point was making a decent living for himself. Scrooge loved Belle very dearly, but gradually his love for Belle was overwhelmed by his love for money. Belle realised that he would resent her poverty and left him, eventually marrying another man. As the years passed, Scrooge never married or had children. He went into business with a fellow gentleman named Jacob Marley. Scrooge and Marley set up a counting house, which offered bookkeeping and accountancy services. But their main line of business was money lending and property investments, where the interest rates were very high, and they made sure every debt was chased up. You could say the two gentlemen were obsessed with money. In about 1836, Jacob Marley passed away. Marley died a rich man, alone, but rich. Marley's death hit Scrooge quite hard. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both. It was all the same to him. After Marley's death, Scrooge became embittered and more obsessed with money. In his book, Dickens describes him as a cold-hearted miser who despises Christmas. Dickens describes Scrooge thus early in the story. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. He was a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. He does business from a Cornhill warehouse and is known among the merchants of the Royal Exchange as a man of good credit. Despite having considerable personal wealth, he underpays his clerk Bob Cratchit and hounds his debtors relentlessly while living cheaply and joylessly in the chambers of his deceased business partner Jacob Marley. Most of all, he detests Christmas, which he associates with reckless spending. When two men approach him on Christmas Eve for a donation to charity, he sneers that the poor should avail themselves of the treadmill or the workhouses, or else die to reduce the surplus population. He also refuses his nephew Fred's invitation to Christmas dinner and denounces him as a fool for celebrating Christmas. He even frightens a young carol singer by gripping a ruler with a fit of energy. Scrooge resents giving Cratchit Christmas Day off, as there will be no business for Scrooge during the day. Bob Cratchit lives nearby with his young family, and despite Bob having a seriously ill son named Tim, Scrooge refuses to give hard-working Bob a raise in salary. On Christmas Eve 1843, Scrooge and Bob Cratchit close up the office as usual. Bob bids Scrooge good evening and a Merry Christmas, which Scrooge replies with his usual "Bah humbug," and they head their separate ways. Bob home to his family and an evening of Christmas cheer and games, Scrooge to his old cold rooms in Marley's chambers and a glass of sherry. Scrooge sat alone for a while and then headed for bed. It didn't seem like he'd slept for long before he woke with a start. What had woken him was, he thought, could it be the rattling and clanging of chains? He listened again. It was clanging of chains, but it wasn't coming from the street below. It was coming from right inside his bedroom. At the foot of his bed was a figure clad in chains. "Who are you?" Scrooge asks. "Ask me who I was," replies the ghost. "Who were you then?" Scrooge asks. "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley. But you don't believe in me, do you?" "I don't," replies Scrooge. Marley asks, "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Marley cries at the disbelieving Scrooge, "Hear me, my time is nearly gone." "Yes, Jacob, go on." "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and a hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer." Scrooge replies, "You were always a good friend to me, thank you." Marley carries on, "You will be haunted by 3 spirits." "Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not." "Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night, when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate," Marley replies. "No, Jacob, no," cries Scrooge. "Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us," Marley wails. "Bah," says Scrooge. "Remember, Ebenezer, remember." "Humbug," replies Scrooge, and with that he hid under the blankets and went back to sleep. He was not asleep for long, as he was woken by a bright flickering light. Before him was a strange, otherworldly creature that shimmered and flickered like a candlelight, constantly changing in appearance as it reflected Scrooge's memories, old and new. As one memory came sharply into focus, so another fades. As the spirit represented Scrooge's youth, so it appeared youthful. Its skin is of the tenderest bloom. But as Scrooge is old now, the spirit also appeared old to reflect this. The ghost's clothing continued in the same contradictory vein, as it holds a branch of holly, which symbolises winter, while its robe is trimmed with summer flowers. In his book, Charles Dickens described it thus: "It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view, and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members, bare. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. When Scrooge demands to know its business, the spirit replies, "Your welfare." When Scrooge demurs that he would rather benefit from a good night's sleep, the spirit responds, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." Although seemingly gentle and ethereal, the spirit is deceptively strong, putting out its strong hand as it spoke, and gently clasped him by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." Scrooge worries that he is liable to fall, but the spirit invites him to fly. Scrooge shows the first flicker of emotion when shown the vision of his unhappy childhood that the spirit reveals to him, particularly when he sees his school friends, and he again sees his younger sister Fan. Scrooge becomes even more animated at the Christmas Eve celebrations during the time of his apprenticeship to Mr. Fezziwig. Scrooge shows a further awakening of his human nature when the spirit asks, "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." Scrooge has been allowed to consider the benefits of being a good and generous employer, as Fezziwig was, and comes to regret mistreating his clerk, Bob Cratchit. The spirit then shows Scrooge his subsequent painful parting from his fiancée Belle, and a now married Belle with her large, happy family on the Christmas Eve that Marley died. When Scrooge becomes upset by these memories, the spirit says, "These are the shadows of the things that have done, that they are what they are, do not blame me." When Scrooge asks the ghost to remove him from the house, he turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, Scrooge wrestles with the ghost, crying out, "Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer," and seizes the spirit's cap. In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, he seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. With this action, Scrooge was aware of feeling drowsy. He barely had time to realise that he was back in his own room before he sank into a heavy sleep. Awakening from a tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge got up and opened the curtains just as the clock struck 1. Remembering what Marley had told him about receiving visitations, he decided to keep a sharp lookout around the bed. He lay upon his bed for a good hour, and nothing happened, and no spirit appeared. It was only after realising that, even with the curtains open, his room seemed unusually light. After a while, he realised that the light was not in his bedroom, but coming from under the door from the room beyond. He got up and shuffled in his slippers over to the door. As he placed his hand upon the lock, a strange voice called him by his name. As he entered the room, which he recognised as his own, he noticed it had undergone a surprising transformation. Every part was hung with greenery and looked like a living grove, and bright red berries hung here and there. In the middle sat a tall figure of a man. The spirit was sat on a throne made of traditional Christmas foodstuffs. Heaped on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. It was clothed in one simple green robe, or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its chest was bare. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanour and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and its ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before this spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." "You have never seen the like of me before," exclaimed the spirit. Scrooge is more chastened in this spirit's company than he was in the presence of the ghost of Christmas past, and expresses his willingness to learn from any lesson the spirit will show him. The spirit takes Scrooge to the city streets. The spirit shows Scrooge the joys and the hardships experienced by his fellow man during one Christmas day, that of the present, taking Scrooge to a joyous market with people buying the makings of Christmas dinner, to celebrations of Christmas in a miner's cottage, a lighthouse, and at his nephew Fred's Christmas party. The spirit takes Scrooge to visit Bob Cratchit and his family, who, although poor, love each other and delight in each other's company. During the family feast, Scrooge sees Cratchit's youngest son, Tiny Tim, who, despite his disability, remains full of Christian spirit and happiness. The spirit informs Scrooge that Tiny Tim will die unless the course of events changes, echoing Scrooge's own words he had earlier used to the two men who were collecting for charity. If he be likely to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge notices that the spirit, notwithstanding his gigantic size, is able to accommodate himself to any place with ease. He stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. The spirit grows visibly older as his time with Scrooge passes, as he explains, "My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight." But before disappearing, Scrooge observes two hideous and emaciated children, ignorance and want, crouching beneath the robe of the spirit. "Oh, man! Look here! Look! Look down here!" exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and girl, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them, "and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out its hand towards the city. "Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes and make it worse, and bide the end." "Have they no refuge or resource?" cried Scrooge. "Are there no prisons?" said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. "Are there no workhouses?" The spirit thus reminds Scrooge that poverty is not a problem of the past or the future, but also the present, and mocks Scrooge's concern for their welfare before disappearing at midnight. Scrooge was left alone upon the city streets. Upon the last stroke of the bell, Scrooge remembered the words of his old friend Marley, and looking up he saw a phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist towards him. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was shrouded. This figure fills him with greater dread than the other ghosts. It does not speak to him and beckons mysteriously with its hand. Scrooge guesses aloud that it is the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and the ghost replies with a slight movement of its head. Though he fears the ghost, Scrooge urges it desperately to show him what it has for him. Scrooge follows the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and suddenly they are amid a street busy with trade. Scrooge stops by a group of businessmen and hears them gossip about the long-awaited death of one of their contemporaries, whom they say is bound to have a cheap funeral. One gentleman comments that he will only go to the funeral if lunch is provided. Christmas yet to come is a sad, immoral place, full of people who have the same miserly values as Scrooge has shown in his life. They don't care about the man who has died. They care only about whether they can profit in some way from his death, and that they think this way says a great deal about the dead man as well, of course. Scrooge looks questioningly to the ghost of Christmas yet to come, but it just moves on to another group. Scrooge recognises these men. This time the men merely mention the death of the mysterious man and don't seem to care at all. Scrooge puzzles through what he has heard. He knows that he is hearing these comments for a reason, but he can't figure out whose death they are discussing. He waits to see himself appear in the vision as he did in the scenes of Christmas past. But when they arrive at the corner where Scrooge usually stands, another man has taken his place. Scrooge hopes that this is because his future self has taken a new turn in life. Scrooge realises the ghost of Christmas yet to come is looking at him again and feels a new surge of terror. The ghost leads him to an infamous part of town, full of misery and crime. Here, in a grimy rag and bone den, they find an old man trying to keep warm in his meagre lodgings. He is soon joined by 3 others, and the group start to laugh together. The old man, Joe, invites his friends into the parlour, and the 3 men offer to trade him bundles of things they have come into possession of after a rich man's death. They agree that it is no sin to take these things without permission, since their owner was so unkind in life. The dead man was wealthy, a man who might have thought of himself as commanding respect throughout the town, and especially over the poor whom he considered his inferiors. Yet here Scrooge sees that for all his wealth the man died alone, with no one to stand up for him, and that in fact he is afforded no respect at all by even the scavengers and dealers that he used to dismiss. The first man opens the first bundle and finds a few small items of not much worth. Joe totals up the value for its owner. The next, a woman opens her bundle and reveals some silver and fabrics. The next reveals a pair of bed curtains and blankets, which the woman says she unwrapped from the dead corpse. It would have been wasted, she adds, by wrapping him in it. Scrooge listens, appalled. The 3 bundles that the scavengers produce for Joe increase in magnitude. The final bundle has been taken from the corpse itself, leaving it to be buried like a pauper. But far from feeling guilty for this sin, the scavengers laugh uproariously. Christmas spirit is completely absent here. The room changes, and now in dim light there is a bed, and on top a body covered in a sheet. The ghost of Christmas yet to come points ominously towards the head, but Scrooge finds he can't make himself remove the cloth. Scrooge assures the ghost of Christmas yet to come that he is aware of the lesson he is being taught and begs to leave, but the spirit will not rest and seems to be staring at him. Scrooge begs him to show one person who feels emotion at the death of the man. They are instantly transported to the home of a young family. The husband comes home, burdened by bad news, but he says there is hope. He tells his wife that the man they are indebted to is dead. His wife can't help but be thankful. They don't know who will take over their debt, but it's very unlikely that he should be such an incredible miser as the last. The house becomes a little lighter and happier for the man's death. This vision goes from bad to worse. Scrooge seems to have a sense that the fate he is witnessing is his own, though as of yet he still hides behind a veneer of ignorance, and becomes more and more distraught, but with the spirit's lack of sympathy, there is nothing he can do but watch as his worst fears regarding the dead man are confirmed. Even the omnipotent ghost is unable to find a single scene that shows any sadness for the loss of this man. In fact, the world seems to be better off for him being gone. But Scrooge wishes to see some scrap of tenderness to dim even slightly the terrible image of the body lying alone in that house. The ghost of Christmas yet to come takes him to Bob Cratchit's house, where the Cratchits are unusually silent, waiting for Bob to come home. Mrs. Cratchit is sewing, but stops because the colour is making her eyes tired. As Scrooge enters with the spirit, he hears a phrase as if in a dream. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. Scrooge realises that Tiny Tim has died. Bob is due home, but one of the children says he's been walking slower recently, and they all agree that he used to go more quickly with Tiny Tim on his shoulders. There is a huge difference between the body lying alone in the dark house and the body of Tiny Tim, kissed and adored in the Cratchit house. The Cratchits have picked a green, fragrant plot for the boy and have promised to visit him every Sunday. The child is given religious significance as a kind of saviour, but the body of the miserly man is left alone in a godless place. At the same time, Cratchit is crushed by Tiny Tim's death, and of course had someone just had some charity, Tiny Tim wouldn't have had to die. At that moment, Bob enters wrapped in his blanket. His family help him to tea, and his children gather around him to comfort him. Bob is pleasant with everybody. He has been to see the place where Tim will be buried. He is pleased to find it green. He promised Tim he would walk there every Sunday. At the thought of his promise, he breaks down into tears. He goes upstairs to the room where Tim has been laid down on a bed. He composes himself, kisses Tim's little face, then goes downstairs again. Mr. Cratchit shows bravery and cheerfulness even in the face of grief, but the loss of Tiny Tim leaves a huge gap in the Cratchit household. Tim was the unlikely leader of the holiday cheer, and without him, the household is a different, solemn atmosphere. Bob then tells his family of the beautiful kindness of Scrooge's nephew, whom he met in the street. Fred noticed that Bob looked sad and gave him sincere condolences and sent his love to his family and gave him his address, so that they could be in touch if they need anything. Bob thinks he might even be able to get Peter, the eldest, a job. One of the children says that Peter will soon leave them and set up with a family of his own. Bob admits that this may be so, but that they will never forget this time together and their first loss of Tiny Tim and how very good he was. Scrooge can tell that the ghost of Christmas yet to come is about to leave him. He wants to know finally who the dead man is. The ghost takes Scrooge to his office, but they seem to be passing through it. Scrooge asks to see himself inside his house, but the spirit points in another direction. He joins the spirit again at the iron gate of a churchyard, a wretched, lifeless place. The ghost of Christmas yet to come keeps pointing. Now it is clear that he is directing Scrooge to one grave in particular. Scrooge desperately asks whether the things the spirit has shown him can be changed or whether they are set in stone. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He had advanced towards it trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape. "Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed downwards to the grave by which it stood. "Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if preserved in, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me." The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I that man who lay upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "No, Spirit! Oh no, no!" The finger still was there. "Spirit!" he cried, tight clutching at its robe. "Hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. "Good Spirit," he pursued as down upon the ground he fell before it, "your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by the altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone." In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Scrooge wakes up in his bed and becomes aware that he is finally back in the present. After a difficult evening of facing his past cruelties, his present actions, and his future prospects, Scrooge is filled with gratitude at a chance to make things right. He looks around the room with remnants of tears on his face, realising that none of his curtains have been torn down and the spirits are gone. He believes wholeheartedly that he can change the terrible future that was shown to him during the night. In a state of bliss, Scrooge grabs his clothing and starts frantically putting them on, looking like a madman in the process. He moves into his sitting room and considers the spot where Jacob Marley appeared to him and the window where he first saw the spirits of the dead. He cannot stop laughing from the joy he feels in his heart. Scrooge wonders how long he's been away from the real world and hears the church bells call to him from the street. He runs to the window, breathes in the cold winter air and asks a boy outside what day it is. The boy, somewhat confused by the question, tells Scrooge it's Christmas Day. Scrooge is elated that he hasn't missed it. He sends the boy to buy the prized turkey that's been hanging in the window of the poultry shop. He decides he will give it to the Cratchit family as a gift. When the boy returns with the large bird, Scrooge sends it off in a cab to the Cratchit home and pays the boy for his troubles. Scrooge laughs so much he begins to cry. Once the bird is taken care of, Scrooge gets ready for the day. He shaves, puts on his best clothing and heads out into the streets. He plans to dine with his nephew Fred and his family. With a smile beaming from ear to ear, Scrooge acknowledges everyone he passes. While walking, he sees a man that came into his shop the previous day asking for donations for the poor. Scrooge remembers treating him poorly and wants to make amends. He grabs the man by the hands and begs for forgiveness, asking him to come by the shop again in the future. The man is taken aback, thinking Scrooge is playing some kind of trick, but when Scrooge offers him a large sum of money, he realises Scrooge is serious. The man promises to return to his shop. After Scrooge reaches Fred's home, it takes him some time before he's able to muster the courage to knock. He enters the home, surprising the family, and ends up having a glorious holiday with them. Christmas Day has been a great success. The next day, Scrooge goes to the office early in the morning in hopes of witnessing Bob Cratchit coming in late. Almost 20 minutes late, Bob rushes through the door and sits at his desk. Scrooge pretends to be angry at him, asking why he has bothered to show up at all. He calls Bob into his office and admonishes him for being late. However, in the same mean tone he growls about his tardiness, Scrooge tells Bob he's going to pay him more money. He tells Bob he will come over for dinner that afternoon and they will discuss how Scrooge can help his struggling family thrive. At first, Bob doesn't believe him, but Scrooge follows through on every promise he makes. On Christmas Day, Scrooge changes his life. Now he is kind to all, takes care of Bob, and becomes like an uncle to Tiny Tim, and spreads joy and laughter everywhere he goes. He He vows to be compassionate and gracious for the remainder of his life, and never again to be mean-spirited or hurtful to others. There is no record as to how old Ebenezer Scrooge is when he dies, or how he comes to be buried here in Shrewsbury, far away from the city of London. But like all good mysteries, I'll let you, the viewer, figure that one out.